and welcome to the podcast, episode 5, where today we're going to be discussing bad parenting. Bad parenting is probably one of the most important things that I've talked about to date, mainly because, as I'm sure you can guess, bad parenting can, lead to a chain of bad parenting because these parents' kids will pick up parents' habits and then pass them on if they have kids. So I want to start off with narcissistic parents. And what I mean by that is parents that believe that their kids have to have the same thoughts and actions as they do. So let's make a scenario here. Let's say there is a parent that absolutely adores Disneyland. Now, their kid has, let's say, a completely different zodiac than them. I'm not really sure if that has to really do anything with that, but let's just say that. Not really too educated on zodiacs, though. But anyway, so let's just say their kid doesn't really like Disneyland that much. Well, to the parent, that's impossible. He's a 5-year-old kid. He must love Disneyland. So they take a week-long vacation to Florida. And, their kid doesn't really like it that much. And instead of the parent saying, "Oh, that's fine. That I understand that you have different have different thought processes than I do," they say, "That's impossible. Billy, you must love Disneyland because you're a kid. That's impossible." So, no matter what the parents, if the parent says this, rather, if the parent says this, it one way or another, the kid is most likely going to end up in a very similar situation, as a grown-up if they ever have kids, because that's just how they grew up. That's what they're used to. So let's say the kid, let's say the brand new parent, as a child who had parents like that, had narcissistic parents. Let's say as a child, instead of liking Disneyland, let's say they like Hot Rod Drag Week or Hot Rod Power Tour at the NHRA, right? So, if they are used to this kind of parenting, they most likely will pass it on to their children. So, basically what happens is their children grow up the same way as they did. They say, "What do you mean you don't love Hot Rod Power Tour? I mean, Tom Bailey drives to California to Florida and stopping at a drag strip in between. I mean, how is that not exciting to you?" So that's narcissistic parenting for you, and it's you don't want to make your child grow up that way, mainly because it destroys their childhood. I mean, it affects them. It makes their grown-up life difficult. And it starts a endless chain, or at least a chain that will last for generations. So that's the issue with narcissistic parenting. It's not something that really needs to be talked about that much, mainly because it's so common that we essentially just take it for granted. We act like it's not even a thing because it's so common. So the next thing I want to talk about is parents that have lost their children. And what I mean by that is children that are outside, not supervised, just in the driveway, and they get stolen, or they just wander off into the woods, right? So the first, of course, issue with this is, the parent is completely at fault here, because the child is, say, 5 years old. He doesn't know any better, he or she. But the parent is the one that is a parent's job until the child is, able to live out on its own. I think that's like 16, 21, I'm not really too sure. But until they are ready to move out, it is the parent's job to let the kid or let their son or daughter make good decisions so they have a good childhood. But say when they're not supervised, they 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 get stolen, they're exposed to things that they really shouldn't be. Their entire lives are destroyed by what they see on YouTube or whatever, and it's the parents' job to make sure their children are safe, right? And of course, as they grow older, you should allow them to be exposed to more things than they did 5 years ago. But you should limit. You should limit how much your child is exposed to certain things. Now, of course, as I say certain things, and I do mean that, because there are certain things that that your child can be exposed to that won't really harm them, right? But say your child gets stolen, right? Well, the parent, as I said a few minutes ago, the parent is completely at fault there, because it's the parent's job to supervise the child. And say they're outside in the driveway and they get stolen or wander off into the woods. Well, the parent should have been there, right? These parents, they underestimate their children, because, again, I'm just putting in a scenario where your child is 5 years old and you're not supervising it. You absolutely need to, because, again, it's not impossible for your child, for bad things to happen to your child. And people just say, oh, I live a normal life. There's no way that could happen to me. It absolutely could. Your life has just as much luck as anyone else's. And that doesn't decrease or increase the probability of something bad happening to your child, no matter what it be. Now, there comes a certain age, as I kind of glossed over earlier, there comes a certain age where you should be allowed to let your child be exposed to certain things, or let them do certain things that they really shouldn't have been doing in their life, say years ago, right? Such as just practice driving, right? And I don't mean, driving a full-sized Ford F-150. I mean, just, try, practicing with, say, a lawnmower or just a Kubota side-by-side, right? That's not illegal to do, right? And you can let your child practice, I would wait, until your child's at least 10 years old, 11, 12. But you can totally practice, or let your child practice with, say, a lawnmower in your yard. You can totally do that, and it's a really good practice for them to do. And it's not just that. I mean, you need to, let your child do certain things, because how are they going to really know how to do it later in their life? Because say you don't let your child practice driving, well, by the time they're 16, I mean, driving's going to be they're going into it completely blind. I mean, the best thing that they're going to do that correlates with driving is take their driver's test. And even so, I mean, how long are driver's tests? I don't know. I've never done one. But they can't last longer than 3 hours. I mean, you need to take a several-day test of driving to get a feel for it, maybe even several months. But anyway, so this just occurred to me. As I briefly mentioned in the last episode about social media, I mentioned if it weren't for social media, there wouldn't be as many people, or maybe even no people, getting things such as anorexia, or just any kind of drawback that is a side effect of making yourself more quote-unquote attractive for social media. So, again, it's not completely the child's fault. If anything, it's not their fault at all. not, and of course, you really should uh, study things before you do them, and that's a issue that kids are doing when they take part in making themselves more quote unquote attractive for social media. But the parents, there's no way these parents don't know that their kids are doing this. It's a noticeable change. You can notice that your child is getting thinner. And the issue is, as I'm sure you can guess, these parents aren't looking into it at all. And of course, neither are their children. But the thing is, as I said, their children are children. They don't get everything, right? And of course, there are kids, that are, 11 years old, and I'm 13, but in 2-year difference. But even so, the parents, especially when you're not, especially when you're under 13, you need to let your parents know that you're doing this stuff. And I want to say this: not all the time it is the parents' fault. There are times where it is completely the kid's fault. But again, they're a kid. They don't really know any better. No matter what age they are. I mean, that's the way they are. They're kids. And, let's say your kid goes into, say, a tunnel, right, underneath a highway, and then the kids tell their parents about it, how cool it was, and say the parents get mad at them. Well, they're kids. Don't get mad at them. They're kids. That's just what they do. Kids are born to explore. But parents need to look in or research what if there's any downsides to what their child is doing, such as making themselves thinner for social media. If they don't do that, well, you're going to the eating disorder unit at the hospital. You totally are. Because that's exactly what anorexia leads to. It's a major issue. So these parents have 3 words in their mind, and this is in order. The first word being I, the second word being don't, and the third word being care. I don't care. And what that leads to is, well, they don't care what their child does. They think that they have better things to do. And you really need to dedicate a lot of time when you have a child, especially when they're below 7 years old, because then the child is especially dependent, excuse me. But the child is not independent, and that's what a lot of these parents think. They think that their children are the most independent people in the world. They think their kids, they'll manage. Children is not French for manage. Children is English for children. Children is not any other language for they can manage themselves. Children is, I need to dedicate a lot of my time because I took a gamble and I need to live up to this gamble. And that's what having a child is. It's taking a massive gamble, but it's a gamble that it's the most important gamble of your life. And when parents take this gamble and then say, well, I took the gamble, what now? Don't do that, because that is a massive no-no. You cannot do that, cannot say that, cannot think that, cannot even think that, even if you know that's an issue. It's an issue even if you think about it slightly, in the slightest bit. You can't teach, manage, do anything to your child this way. So obviously what a lot of this leads to is parents losing custody of their kids. So what happens when this happens is the parents immediately think, I was like the best parent in the world. How could this happen to me? You weren't, because if you were the best parent in the world, this wouldn't have happened. And of course, a lot of people can't really think straight when something this dramatic happens, and I can understand that. But even so, it's the parents' fault. It is completely the parents' fault. Because that is the way that they thought that's the way they thought that they can parent. And they took that risk, and this is what the risk led to. And they're just going to have to live with that. They're going to have to live with the title of non-custodial. And that's final. You can't do anything about that. So another thing that quote unquote parents are doing, well, not quote unquote parents are doing, is they're becoming parents way too soon. Say there is, a 20-year-old woman and a 20-year-old man, and they have kids, right? Well, they're 20 years old. Their brain hasn't even fully developed. I mean, by my standards, they're still kids. If you're under 25, you're a kid. And that's that. I mean, feel free to argue, but that's that. If you're under 20, especially, you're a kid. But anyway, so what happens when kids have kids? When kids have kids, well, they're too young to really know what to do. They're not in they're in a situation where they still have the mindset that they did 5 years ago, and they still will for at least 5 more years. Now, that doesn't go to say that there are some actual good young parents out there, because there totally are. But 99% of kid parents are not really that great. And that's because they haven't had the complete experience with life. And neither have I. I'm 13. I don't really know a lot about life. And I've only had 13 years to experience it. And I got a long way to go. So as I said, if kids have kids, the parent kids are still going to have the mindset of a kid. So that could really be anything. Let's say they are really drunk, right? And they, without thinking, because they're drunk, they go out and get meth or whatever. And they take the car and the 5-year-old along with them. Let's say they're 7, so they actually have a slight idea of what's going on, but they don't really know. So, as I said, these kid parents still have the mindset of a kid, so they still have the motive of being a kid, because they are one. And what happens when that happens is, well, they think, oh, I'm 21. I can literally do anything. I can drive. I can drink. I'm a grown-up. Not really at all. But let's say they get drugs with their children, and their children experience all of it. So what happens when that happens is the kids have the exact same mindset that their parents have. And just like narcissistic parents, it leads to a chain that leads, or that goes on for generations. And there are certain kinds of parent or family chains that go on for generations that are good, such as, being a good person in general. If you're a good person in general, and that can lead to a chain that goes on for generations. Not saying it always does, because sometimes it doesn't, and it leads for maybe just a few years, but it can, and that's a great thing, and you should strive to be that parent. So, to conclude, there are good parents out there. There are good parents, and then there are bad kids, and then there are bad parents, and then there are good kids. And you either fall under good parents, good kids, bad parents, bad kids, or the one I just mentioned a few seconds ago, the two I just mentioned a second ago. And you want to fall under the category of good parent, good kid, because that is the best category to fall under. So, with that, I think it is time to end this episode. Have a good day, and don't be narcissistic.